Can you imagine suddenly losing your sight when you're in high school? That's what happened to my guest today, Laura Bratton. And in many ways, it was as difficult as you can imagine. But God showed up for Laura with his grace. Today, she shares a powerful story of what God did in her life. Welcome to the Grace Cycle Show with Karen Dittman, your host. This is your place where you can learn to stop striving and rely on God's grace for all that you need in life. Well, hi, Laura, and welcome to the Grace Cycle Show. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes. So you have a pretty powerful story of how you saw God's grace at work in your life from when you were younger. So I'm just going to let you jump in and start telling us your story.
Okay, great. So I'm going to make a very, very, very long story short, and then we can absolutely go from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was diagnosed with a rare eye disease at the age of 9. And my vision at that time really wasn't affecting me. It was just very, very, very minor. My parents noticed it. I didn't even notice any vision loss. It wasn't until I was a teenager where I lost all of my sight. So by the time I graduated from high school, I had like no usable vision, a tiny bit of light perception. That's it. So throughout that whole experience of being diagnosed, the uncertainty of when, becoming blind as a teenager, then having to figure out how to move forward in life was incredibly traumatic and difficult. And that's where I experienced God's incredible grace just woven through it all.
Wow. So it sounds like maybe your vision loss was fairly sudden when it came on when you were in
It
high
was
school.
very sudden. So they couldn't give us a timeline, but what they were thinking, predicting, assuming was I would be much older. So
Mm.
now I'm 41. They were thinking, oh, you might be 40 when when this happens. There was no expectation it would happen that quickly as a teenager.
Oh my goodness. And in high school as a
Right.
teenager, all of the social things that,
Right. And all the hormones.
yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. You say traumatic, and I can imagine that being really traumatic, really
Yes.
hard.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you realize that it's not going to be 20 years from now, it's going to happen when I'm a teenager, what was that like for you inside?
At first, it was intense denial.
Mm.
I'm not going blind. I'm just losing a small amount of my vision. I can just pray my way through this and my vision will return to 2020. By the end of high school, when I graduate, all my vision will come back. It was just complete denial. Once the denial wore off and the reality I accepted because I didn't have a choice, right? Reality was what it was. It was intense grief, the intense grief of the loss of how easy I knew life was with sight, and grieving the loss, grieving what my future would no longer be, meaning of having full sight. So through that grief was intense anxiety and extremely intense depression.
Mm. Yes. You were talking about praying, like, I'm going to pray and God will hear this and restore this. And that is a big thing a lot of us wrestle with is what do you do when God doesn't answer your prayers?
So my prayer was, yes, like I said, it was prayer for healing, but my prayer was, God, I can't. This is too hard. This is too much. I don't have the strength. I can't. And like I said, obviously I was praying for my healing, but yeah, you're right. It was like that was my hope. And when that didn't happen, what was my hope? What was my foundation? And what I slowly realized through my support system is no, I didn't receive the physical healing that I so desperately wanted. Yet I realized that God's presence was still with me. That
Mm.
just because my prayer wasn't answered to restore my sight didn't mean God was not present, that God wasn't giving me the amazing grace, the unconditional love, the abiding presence through it all in the suffering, in the grief.
Mm. Wow. So you said two things. You said your support, you had community, you had people around you.
Yes.
And then through that, you were able to connect with God's presence. So tell me more about the support that you had around you.
So the support is, and I mean this very literal, I don't mean this like a cliche. The support is the reason I am where I am today.
Mm-hmm.
When I was so overwhelmed with that anxiety and depression and grief and identity, I didn't have the strength for every day. I didn't have confidence within myself. And so I thought, what's the purpose? I clearly must not have meaning anymore. I must not have value. And so as I'm thinking those thoughts, it was support around me saying, we do believe in you. And it wasn't their words. If they literally said that to me, I would have said, don't talk. Like, be quiet. I wouldn't have listened, right? Because remember, I'm a teenager, right? So
Mm-hmm.
teenagers know it all and have it all figured out. So it was the parents that taught me all we have to do is focus on today.
Mm.
We don't have to figure out the whole future tonight, right? Where am I going to college? Oh, what am I going to do? Blah, blah. We don't have to figure all that out. All we have to do is get through today, Wednesday,
Mm.
Tuesday, just get through the day. It was that support system. It was the support system of my brother. And when I say this, it's not at all going to sound like support. It was my brother who's 5 years older continuing to treat me normal.
Mm.
And that was such a healing resource because as I'm wondering, do I still have meaning, purpose? Is there still a point to me living? Him just continuing to treat me normal was that one sense of, oh, that part of life is still the same. It gave me that normalcy that I needed that was deeply healing. In the moment, I guarantee you, it didn't feel like support, right? Like I was like, why aren't you crying with me? Don't you feel sorry for your little sister? I wanted him to just baby me and coddle me. Yet he knew what I needed was that normalcy.
Mm.
That was a
That's,
source of strength.
yeah, that's very powerful. And then, yeah, you said your parents encouraging you just to live in the moment, just take it day by day by day, and don't live in that anxiety. That is
Right.
really a great thing for any of us.
For all of us, right? Regardless
Yeah.
of the situation, I still live by that today.
Mm.
A
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then how did you experience God's presence? I'm imagining there was a good bit of time when you were kind of caught in the anxiety and the depression and God broke through.
So I don't want to make it sound like it was an easy
Hmm.
switch. Like one day I woke up and just said, "Oh, this is great. God's grace is amazing." It
Right.
wasn't just that one moment where I was like, "Oh yeah, this is perfect and easy." It was a small series of moments that, as you perfectly said, broke through the anxiety and depression. And I love that visual because it wasn't like, "Oh, I believe in God's grace." My anxiety magically vanished, right? It was
Yeah.
what you said, broke through. So it was experiencing a moment of God's grace in the midst of a panic attack.
Mm.
So that panic attack just barely became bearable. And then the next day, that moment of grace increased a little bit more. So it was a little more bearable. So again, you said it absolutely perfect. It was that constant breaking through to show up and remind me God's grace is here. God's love is here. You are still a beloved child of God, even in the midst of the trauma, even in the midst of the grief.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. That is powerful. And I talk about God's grace being not just his gifts, not just his favor and salvation, but God's grace is his power at work. And he has clearly just poured that out and used that grace to just sink into your soul in a sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that because the trauma was so deep of adjusting to life without sight, that depth is what I had to have had.
Mm.
That I needed that deep level and ongoing. Again, it wasn't I experienced God's grace one time. It was an ongoing thread. And again, I know I said it a lot, but I'll say it again. You said it perfectly. Continuing even now at 41, daily experiencing those moments, those threads of God's grace in the midst of every day.
Mm. And I imagine that you're looking for them more.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And that's what made the grace increase or made my experience. It wasn't that God's grace increased. It was that I recognized I experienced it. So
Mm,
once in those high school days, once I got an experience of it, I wanted more. So I was open to receiving more.
mm,
So
yeah.
yes, but again, today I'm open to receiving it and more aware of it. So it's quickly noticeable.
Mm, yeah. That's great. You talk about how gratitude became a source of strength for you. What did that look like?
So gratitude all started by conversation with a mentor. So
Mm,
I had a spiritual mentor say to me one day, Laura, I want you to start focusing on gratitude and developing a mindset of gratitude. So every day, I want you to write down three things that you're grateful for, three events, three people, three situations from that day that you're grateful for. And I want you to be very specific on that day because I don't want you just to be general and say family, friends, shelter, food every single day. But I want you to make it very clear from that day. Remind you, I'm a teenager. I'm extremely anxious. I'm very depressed. I'm going blind. I'm trying to figure out how to live a life without sight in a sighted world. And in my head, I was thinking, that is terrible advice, right? Like,
mm.
that is horrible advice. I don't think you should be like a spiritual teacher, right? Because that I do not know how bad I'm suffering. So, in my teenage stubbornness, I was determined to prove her wrong and prove her, here's my piece of paper and notice this blank, right? Like, there's nothing on here. So, there's nothing I'm grateful for. So, the one day became 3 days. The 3 days became a week. The week became a month. And what I slowly realized was that she was not teaching me be grateful for the trauma, for the suffering, for the blindness. Be grateful for what helps you navigate through the blindness, through the suffering. So, just to circle back about my parents, a very practical example, she was not teaching me to wake up and say, I am so grateful today for this blindness. She was teaching me to end the day and say, in the midst of the suffering and grief and loss and anxiety and depression, I'm thankful that I have parents that are teaching me to live in the moment.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that
So
is,
it's noticing in our adversity, in just our daily life, not just adversity, but everyday moments of life. What are we grateful for that got us through the day?
mm, I love that. I love that. Has your experience of gratitude shifted over the years instead of being thankful just for the specific things, or is it kind of the same?
100%. So it definitely started out like the mentor suggested at the end of every day, think about three things. Now, over time, and it has been this way for years and years, just as events happen during the day, I recognize that and are grateful for it and move forward, keep going with my day. So it's now a mindset. It's not something like tonight, I won't sit down before I go to bed and say, okay, what am I grateful for? Let me name my three things. I just think about the gratitude as they happen.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
a very clear example that literally happened this afternoon. I was on the phone with an appointment and talking to someone, and I was outside, and turkeys were in the woods to my left, and I could hear them like walking around and talking to each other. And I didn't even realize I was doing it, but just in my mind, I was like, wow, I am so grateful for just hearing that and having that experience and moved on, like, right, went back and
Yeah.
focusing on the
Yeah.
conversation. So that's what I share that to say. It's gratitude is now just woven into my experience.
I love that. And I'm just kind of tying together how your parents taught you live in the moment, and now you are experiencing gratitude in the moment as it happens.
You're so right. You're
Yeah.
100% right. It's the gift of being in the moment, of recognizing, yes, that gratitude in the moment. And that's so deeply healing. And again, I want to make it clear it's not just when we're experiencing adversity, it's
Mhm.
everyday life. We need this as a healing resource. And that's what I experience. I need gratitude. That mindset of gratitude as deeply on the good days as I do on the difficult days.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
not based on situation, it's just based on us being human.
Right. That is so true.
Can I say
Yes.
one more thing about
Yes.
gratitude?
Yes.
And
Go ahead.
I also want to make it very clear gratitude, again, it's not when we feel good. So it's not waiting until we feel happy, joyful, and then we're grateful. It's being grateful in the midst of life.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, it can be so easy to feel grateful when things are going well. And it also, at the same time, it can feel very easy to focus on the negative aspects of life when things are not going well. So, gratitude, like you said, it grounds us in that moment, regardless of the situation.
Mm. Very well said. I love that. Thank you, Laura. I was going to ask you, for somebody who is facing a diagnosis that just feels impossible, feels like you said when you were a teenager, I can't do this, God. I can't go there. What encouragement might you give somebody in that situation?
My very first advice is to sit in that acknowledgement, sit in those feelings, validate your feelings. Your feelings are 100% real and totally, totally valid. And the reason I say that is because in those high school days, and even now, when I'm having those emotions of what you're describing, and we're in that painful situation, I instantly want to jump to, okay, God, where are you? What are you going to do? How are you going to heal this situation? Like, I want to instantly jump to the conclusion, and I don't give myself time to sit and validate those feelings. And when we don't do that, that covers up and dismisses our pain and prevents us from getting and experiencing God's grace. So
Yeah.
again, it doesn't prevent us from receiving God's grace, it prevents us from experiencing and acknowledging God's grace. So, my very first step to anyone experiencing a diagnosis, a loss, a major change would be validate the feelings. Give yourself permission to say, this is really, really hard. God, I'm mad at you. God, I don't like this. God, I wish this wasn't happening. Give yourself the space to acknowledge that.
Mm.
And then the next step would be know it is a strength and a source of grace to lean on your support system.
Yes.
When we've received a diagnosis, experienced a loss, gone through major change, we need that support system to be our grace.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And God will meet us through those people in our lives
One
too.
1000%. And we
Yeah.
will receive that so much more than trying to say, okay, God, I'm sitting here. Where's your grace? Right? Like, because so much is happening mentally, physically, spiritually in those difficult diagnosed places. We need others to be the grace to us and to
Mm.
show us the grace.
Yeah. Because we weren't meant to live in isolation.
Right. Right. And depending on our support system is not a weakness and does not mean we're weak in our faith.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. Because God gives us those people in our lives.
Right, right.
And I really,
100%.
yeah. And I really believe that God created us to need other people, to be in
1000.
relationships. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's so much grace experienced in that connection.
Hmm. Yes. So, Laura, you have now turned your pain and your adversity. And I love when God does this. He takes these impossible pains in our lives and he redeems them. And so now you're turning it around to helping other people. Why don't you tell us about what you're doing now?
Yeah. So, what I do now is speaking and coaching, and it's all around how do we navigate through change? So, I've developed a framework. The experiencing grit and gratitude is what I've trademarked. And what I speak on and have written my book on and coach people on is as we navigate through loss, through difficulties, through change, how can we use the balance of grit and of gratitude to navigate through so that we experience God's grace. So we experience God's grace and can move forward. The change doesn't just block us from experiencing God's grace and this end of story. Rather, we can experience the change and move forward with God's grace, by God's grace. And I've talked a lot about the gratitude part. I'd love to mention the grit part and how that
Sure.
plays into my work. So the way that I've learned how my definition of grit has changed is grit is that acknowledging, again, what I said earlier, validating our feelings and then still choosing to trust God's grace and move forward. So a
Mm.
practical example from my life would be, yes, I was feeling incredibly anxious and overwhelmed and full of panic attacks during those high school days. I had a choice. I could experience, feel, and acknowledge that anxiety and just give up on life. Or I could say, I feel this anxiety, this panic attack is intense, and I choose to move forward in this next moment, trusting God's grace.
Mm.
So that's the grit that I speak on, that I work with others on, is how do we develop that grit and balance that out with gratitude?
Mm. That is that is great because so often we hear the word grit and we think I'm just pushing through, but it's not, and it's starting from the place of, and I completely agree with you about needing to validate and honor those emotions that we feel in that time of change and that
Yes,
time of grief.
100%.
Hmm.
And it sounds weird to say it, and I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't experienced it. But in acknowledging how we're feeling, we feel and experience God's grace.
Hmm.
I can't explain it. I can't put that into words. I just know it when I feel it. And other people that I've worked with, they feel the same. When we validate their feelings, they experience God's grace. It's like a breath of fresh air.
Hmm. Well, there's also when we are experiencing those feelings and bringing God into it, how can we not be aware that Jesus experienced it all too? And so he gets it. He understands what we're going through.
Yes. And it makes Jesus real,
Yeah.
not out there, up there, over there, distant.
Mm, yeah. 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 Because he was God and human. And so he understands our human experience.
Right.
Great. Laura, this has been such a fun conversation. And I'm wondering how people can get a hold of you and learn more about your speaking and your coaching, learn more about grit and gratitude.
So the best way is through my website. laurabratton.com has all the resources about my book, speaking, coaching, connecting with me, emailing me, contacting me is all right there. So the website's the best.
Okay, great. And I will be sure to put that in the show notes. And if you could leave our listeners with just one takeaway from what we've talked about today, what would that be?
The takeaway would be trust that you are enough.
Mm,
And the reason I say that is because in loss, in change, in adversity, in difficulty, we forget that we're still a beloved child of God. We
yeah.
forget that we still have so many incredible gifts that God has given us. And so we assume we're not enough because of the change, because of the loss, because of the difficulty. So I just encourage others to hear us say, if you don't believe it for yourself, that even in the midst of difficulty and loss, you are enough.
Mm, beautiful encouragement. Thank you, Laura. And thank you so much for your time today. And I'm excited.
Absolutely. Thank you for this platform to speak on God's grace, because that's what we all need.
We sure do. Amen. I loved my conversation with Laura. And I really feel like this is a good way to frame this third season of the Grace Cycle Show because we all go through times of loss and pain. And Laura offered us great encouragement with her reminders to live in the moment, acknowledge our emotions when we're faced with loss and pain, practice gratitude because it really does help, and lean on the support of others. That's where we can deeply experience God's grace and know we're not alone. As I reflected on Laura's big takeaway, trust that you are enough, it struck me that we can so easily let our circumstances define us. But loss and pain enter our lives not because we aren't good enough or don't have what it takes. They don't have to define us. Let God's love and grace be the place you go to find your identity instead. If you don't know quite where to go in all of this, I'd like to offer you a copy of the Grace chapter of my book, Thriving in Grace. It outlines the grace cycle, which is a valuable framework for growth and transformation. You can download a copy on my website at KarenADittman.com. So that's it for today. Until next time, remember, get curious, stay connected, and live in grace.